I'm Justin, 15 years old, just another teenager living in a small suburban town. I've got a pretty normal life, school, hanging out with my friends, and of course, volleyball. Volleyball is my thing. It's been that way since I was younger. I remember the first time I spiked the ball with my friends. It just clicked. Ever since then, I've been hooked. After school, I'm usually at the gym practicing, serving, setting, spiking, trying to get better. Our school team isn't the best, but we have heart, and that's what keeps me coming back. My family's pretty normal too. My mom's a nurse. My dad works at an office. They both work hard, and they're always there for me, even if they're busy sometimes. On weekends, we try to spend time together. Movie nights, dinners, the usual stuff. Nothing too crazy, but I like it. I know they care. But sometimes, I can't shake the feeling that something's missing. It's not that I'm unhappy, but some days I find myself just staring out the window, wondering if there's more to life than this small town. Maybe it's a typical teenage thing, wanting more adventure, or maybe it's just me wanting to see what else is out there. I don't know. All I know is that there's something beyond school, volleyball, and the same streets I walk every day. Maybe it's just curiosity, but it feels like there's something more waiting for me. Something I can't quite put my finger on. For now, I guess I'll just take things one day at a time. But who knows? Maybe soon enough, I'll find out what's out there for me. I know I'm still figuring out what I want to do with my life, but right now, all I'm sure of is that I don't want to be stuck doing something boring. I mean, sure, everyone says I should get a good education and all that, but some of the stuff they make us learn in school just feels pointless. History? Yeah, I get it, it's important and all, but I don't see how memorizing dates and facts about old battles is going to help me in the future. Same with half the math lessons. When am I ever going to need to know the exact formula for calculating the area of a triangle? I'd much rather be doing something that feels more real, you know? What I do know is that I've always been into computers. Games, mostly. I spent a lot of my free time gaming. Anything from strategy games to first-person shooters. It's not just about playing. I've been learning about how the games are made, the coding and design behind it all. It's crazy how much goes into it. I've always been fascinated by the idea that someone can create an entire world, a whole different universe, all inside a computer. I thought about maybe getting into game design or programming one day. Maybe work for a company that makes big games or start my own indie game studio. That'd be amazing. I know it's going to take a lot of work, and that's kind of why I'm not super into the stuff they teach us at school. The real world's different. It's not about remembering every little thing that happened in 1492. It's about skills that actually matter. I mean, coding, problem solving, creative thinking. That's what I want to be learning. But for now, I guess I just keep doing my best in school and hope that I can find a way to make what I love into a career. One way or another, I'll figure it out. My parents are pretty typical, I guess, but also a little old-fashioned in some ways. My dad works at a bank. He's been there for years, and he's one of those guys who's always talking about security and stability. He's always telling me how important it is to work hard and save up for the future. Sometimes it feels like all he ever thinks about is money, but I know it's because he wants the best for us. He wants me to have a good career and make something of myself, which is kind of annoying because it feels like he doesn't get that I don't need the same things he does. He's always saying I should go into something practical like accounting or finance. Ugh, not my thing, but he's a good guy. He works long hours, but when he's home, he tries to be involved. He'll watch TV with me or help me out with stuff if I ask. My mom's a little different. She's more of the creative one in the family. She works as a graphic designer, which I think is cool. She does a lot of freelance work, making websites, designing logos, and stuff like that. She has a bunch of weird gadgets lying around, and I've always liked messing with them. Sometimes she'll let me help her out with her work, like when she needs me to test a website or give her feedback. I think she'd probably like it if I got into something artsy, but that's not really me. I can appreciate it though. She's always been the one to remind me to take breaks and not get too stressed out. She's not the sit down and do your homework kind of parent. She's more laid back, but still, she gets on me when I'm slacking off. Both of them always tell me to be responsible and plan for the future, but I can't help feeling like they're stuck in their own way of thinking. They want me to be safe, like them, but I want to take some risks and do something different. I don't know if they'll ever fully understand that, but I guess that's what it means to be a teenager. Trying to figure out who you are while everyone else has their ideas about what you should be. A month ago, my mom made a big change. She used to be a veterinarian, and I always thought that was pretty cool. She loved animals, always had a bunch of them around the house when I was younger. I remember how excited she would get whenever she rescued a stray or helped some animal get better. It was pretty obvious that she loved her job, even though it wasn't easy. But about a month ago, she quit being a vet and started working as an accountant. I still don't really get why. She said it was because it was a more stable job, better hours, and more money, but it felt like she was turning her back on something she loved. Since she made the switch, she's been different. She's more serious now, a little more stressed out. I think it's the numbers and paperwork. She's always sitting at the kitchen table with piles of files, doing taxes or whatever accountants do. She's not as fun as she used to be. Before, she'd be the one suggesting we go on little trips or take breaks. Now it's all about deadlines and how much she needs to get done. Even when she's not working, she's always thinking about work. It's like this new job is weighing her down. I don't know, I miss the old version of her. She used to be more carefree, and she always had this energy about her that made things feel fun, even when life was tough. Now it's like she's always worrying about something. I don't know if it's the job or just life in general, but it's different. I wish she would go back to being a vet or do something that made her happy. But I guess it's her life, right? She made her choice. It just makes me wonder if she's happy now. Since my mom started her new job, things at home have felt quieter. Not necessarily in a bad way, but different. My dad, on the other hand, hasn't really changed. He still works at the same place, doing his usual routine. He's always been a bit of a workaholic, but he tries to be there for me when I need him. He's not as talkative as I am, but I know he cares. He'll watch my volleyball games when he can, and he always makes sure I have what I need for school. But even with Dad's consistency, the house feels off. My mom's stress is kind of contagious, I guess. Sometimes, I'll catch her staring at the computer screen in silence, and it feels like I can almost feel the weight of everything she's dealing with. She still tries to do the usual mom things, cooking dinner, asking about my day, but it's almost like she's on autopilot now, just going through the motions. And I get it, sort of. It's not like she's doing this for herself. She's doing it for us. For me. For the family. She says she's doing what's best for us. But I can't help but wonder if it's all worth it if it means she's not happy. But she doesn't really talk about it. Not to me, at least. I don't think she wants me to worry about her. She tries to act normal, but I can tell it's getting to her. At the same time, I know it's not just the job that's been on her mind. Something else is going on. She's been more distant lately, like she's lost in her thoughts. And when I try to ask her about it, she just brushes it off, says everything's fine. But it's not fine. I know her too well to not see that. It's weird though. I don't know how to talk to her about it. I'm just a kid, right? And she's supposed to be the one who has everything figured out. But she doesn't seem to. And the way she acts now makes me feel like there's more to her than just this job. She's always been the one who told me to follow my dreams, to not let anyone tell me what I should be doing with my life. But now it feels like she's trapped in something she didn't want. Maybe it's just a phase. I don't know. I guess I'll just wait and see how things play out. But I still can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. I hope she figures it out soon. Things didn't get any better over the next couple of weeks. If anything, it felt like the gap between me and my mom was widening. I'd catch her more often staring out the window, lost in thought. When I'd ask if she was okay, she'd give me one of those forced smiles, the kind that never quite reached the eyes, and say everything was fine. But I wasn't buying it anymore. One evening, after I got back from practice, I found her sitting in the living room, papers scattered across the coffee table. She was holding a pencil and scribbling something in a notebook, but her face was drained. I could tell she hadn't noticed me standing in the doorway, so I just stood there for a minute, watching her. I almost wanted to turn around and go back to my room. It felt like if I asked her what was going on, she'd just brush me off again. But this time, I couldn't just ignore it. I had to say something. "Mom," I said softly, stepping into the room. She looked up, startled. Then her face softened. "Oh, hey, Justin. How was practice?" "Fine," I muttered, but my mind was still on her. "What are you doing?" She hesitated for a moment, looking down at the papers on the table, before replying. "Just work stuff. You know, balancing the books and all that." I could tell it wasn't just work stuff. It was the same thing I'd seen her do before when something was bothering her, but she didn't want to talk about it. There was this strange sense of pressure hanging in the air, like something was about to burst, but she was trying to keep it all together. "You've been really busy lately," I said carefully. But you don't seem like yourself. She stiffened just a little, but then she smiled. The same half-hearted smile that never reached her eyes. I'm fine, really. Just a lot on my plate, that's all. But I didn't believe her. I'd seen the way she'd been acting. Quiet, withdrawn, like she was carrying the weight of the world and didn't know how to let it go. You sure? I pressed. I mean, you don't have to keep everything inside. You can talk to me. She let out a small, tired laugh, shaking her head. It's not something you need to worry about, honey. Just a little stress, that's all. But even as she said it, I could see the cracks starting to show. It was like she was trying so hard to hold everything together, but it was slipping through her fingers. And it hurt me to see her like that, knowing there was nothing I could do to help. I just want you to be happy, Mom, I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She stared at me for a moment, her eyes softening. I know, sweetie. I know. But even then, I could tell she wasn't being completely honest. Something was going on with her, and I wasn't sure what it was. But I knew I had to figure it out. Maybe it wasn't just the job or the stress. Maybe it was something deeper. So, for the first time in a while, I didn't just let it slide. I stayed with her, sat down at the table, and started talking to her about stuff. Anything, really. I asked her about her day, about the little things that used to make her laugh. I tried to pull her back into the normal conversation we used to have, back when things weren't so complicated. She didn't say much at first, but eventually, she started talking. Little by little, the walls she'd built up around herself started to come down. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe we didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in weeks, she seemed like she was letting me in again. And that made me feel a little less helpless. I knew we'd figure it out together. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes in my mom. It wasn't like a sudden shift or anything dramatic, but there was a slight lightness to her. When I came home from school, she didn't immediately retreat into her room or the office to work on her numbers. Instead, she'd be in the kitchen, humming softly while she prepared dinner, or sitting with me at the table, asking about my day. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for me to feel like maybe we were starting to get back to a place where we could talk. One evening, after dinner, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. Nothing serious, just one of those reruns of an old sitcom that we used to watch together when I was younger. It felt almost normal again. My mom was laughing at one of the jokes, and for a moment, it felt like everything was okay. But then, she suddenly went quiet. I glanced over at her, and her smile faltered for a second. I could tell she was thinking about something, probably the same thing that had been weighing on her. It was like the moment we shared earlier, where I tried to get her to open up, was just a temporary relief, and the pressure was building again. I didn't want to push her too much, but I also couldn't ignore it anymore. I reached for the remote to turn off the TV and turn my full attention to her. Mom, I said, my voice softer this time. What's really going on? She looked at me, her eyes full of hesitation. For a few seconds, I thought she was going to dodge the question again. But instead, she sighed deeply, putting the remote down on the coffee table and folding her hands in her lap. I don't want you to worry, Justin, she said quietly, her voice a little shaky. But I feel like I'm in over my head sometimes. The job, the change, and everything. I thought I'd be able to handle it all. But it's harder than I expected. I was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. I hadn't realized just how much the change in her work had been affecting her. The new job wasn't just an adjustment in her schedule. It was taking a toll on her confidence, on her sense of stability. You've been doing so much, and I didn't notice how it was getting to you, I said softly, my heart going out to her. You don't have to do it all alone, you know? She shook her head slowly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I know, sweetie, but sometimes I feel like if I don't keep it all together, everything will fall apart. And I can't let that happen. Not for you. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. My mom had always been the rock of our family, the one who kept things together when everything else seemed chaotic. But now, I realized she was carrying a weight that she hadn't shared with anyone. You don't have to do it all by yourself, Mom, I said firmly, making sure she heard the sincerity in my voice. We're in this together. We're a team, remember? She gave me a small, grateful smile, and for the first time in a while, I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. That night, before bed, I promised myself I wouldn't let her go through this alone. Maybe I couldn't fix everything, but I could be there for her. We'd figure it out together. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that if we talked and kept being there for each other, we'd get through whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, I could help her find a little peace again. As I lay there, trying to sleep, I felt a little less burdened, a little more hopeful. The silence between us didn't seem as heavy. And for the first time in a while, I wasn't worried about what tomorrow would bring. We had each other, and that was enough. Over time, things started to get worse. My mom, who had always been understanding and calm, began to change in ways I couldn't quite explain. It started with the small things, like how she'd yell at me more if I didn't finish my homework, something she had never done before. I wasn't the perfect student, but she used to be more lenient. It was like she had no patience anymore, and her voice had an edge to it that made me flinch. It didn't feel like her at all. And then there was the food. My mom used to love cooking. It was one of the things she did that always made our house feel like home. But lately, the meals she prepared just didn't taste the same. They were bland, poorly cooked, and lacked the care she used to put into them. She seemed distracted when she was in the kitchen, rushing through everything, like she wasn't even present. I tried to ignore it at first, but one day, I was sitting at the table, pushing my food around on my plate, when I looked up and saw her standing by the counter. Her eyes were different, distant, and almost cold. It was a look I'd never seen in her before. She was staring at me, but it was like she wasn't really seeing me. A chill ran down my spine. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. She started treating me like I was a stranger, barking orders at me, and getting angry over the smallest things. She didn't smile anymore, and it felt like she was always on edge. I began to wonder what was happening to her, but every time I tried to talk to her about it, she'd either brush me off or snap at me to stop being dramatic. But the most unsettling thing was her physical appearance. It was subtle at first. Her hair wasn't as neat, and she looked more tired than usual. But over time, I noticed that her eyes had this hollow, almost lifeless quality to them, and her face seemed thinner, like she wasn't taking care of herself. It was like she was deteriorating both mentally and physically, and I had no idea why. I tried to tell my dad about it once, but he just shrugged it off, saying she was probably just stressed from work. But I knew something was wrong. My mom wasn't just stressed, she was changing, and it was scaring me. One evening, after another argument about my homework, I was sitting in my room trying to focus on my studies, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept wandering back to my mom and how different she was. I heard her footsteps outside my door and froze, holding my breath. I didn't want another fight, but I knew she was coming for me. When she entered, I didn't even look up. I could feel her presence, though, darker than usual, like she was a completely different person. "Justin," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "You're not trying hard enough. You need to do better. Don't make me come back in here." I didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. She just turned and left, leaving the door open slightly, as if to remind me of her control over me. Something was wrong, and I didn't know how to fix it. The next day, I woke up feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off. It was just another weird day, I told myself. But things didn't improve. They only got worse. After school, when I walked into the house, I could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, suffocating, like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Mom was in the living room, sitting in the armchair, staring at the wall. Her gaze was unfocused, like she wasn't really looking at anything. It was unsettling. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. Not even a glance. "Mom?" I said, stepping closer. Her head slowly turned towards me, but her eyes were empty, like she was looking right through me. It sent a shiver down my spine. She blinked a few times, like she was waking up from a daze. "Oh, Justin," she said in a voice that didn't sound like her at all. It was flat, emotionless. "I didn't hear you come in." I hesitated for a moment. "Are you okay?" I asked, but as soon as I did, I regretted it. Her face tightened, and I could see a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "I'm fine," she snapped, standing up suddenly. "You shouldn't question me. Go do your homework." I backed away, not knowing how to respond. Something was really wrong here. She wasn't my mom anymore. That evening, after dinner, I found myself unable to shake the feeling that something was following me, something just out of reach, lurking around the corner. I stayed in my room for the rest of the night. trying to drown out the strange thoughts in my head. But when I lay down to sleep, the feeling wouldn't go away. The house felt like it was closing in on me, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my room. I froze listening. It wasn't my dad. The steps were slow, deliberate, like someone was trying to be quiet but couldn't quite hide the sound of their movements. I held my breath, trying to hear more, but it was so quiet now, I thought I might be imagining things. Then I heard it softly from the hallway. "Justin." It was my mom's voice, but it was different. It was low, raspy, almost like a whisper that was forced out of her throat. I felt my heart race as I lay perfectly still, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. "Justin, come out here," she said again, the voice now eerily sweet, almost seductive. I swallowed hard, trying not to make a sound. What was happening to her? Why was she acting like this? I didn't know, but I didn't want to find out. The fear gripped me as I waited, praying she would leave. But then, suddenly, the door creaked open. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just lay there, my body frozen, barely breathing. The room seemed darker, even though the moonlight was filtering through the window. I could feel her presence in the room with me. The air had grown heavier, as if the walls were closing in. And I knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. I heard the soft rustling of her clothes as she stepped inside. "Come to me, Justin," she said again, her voice now barely above a whisper. It sounded wrong, too soft, too unnatural. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might explode. With a burst of adrenaline, I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, slamming it behind me. I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with her acting like this. I ran through the hall, not even thinking about where I was going. I just had to escape. I reached the front door and grabbed the handle. But just as I was about to pull it open, I heard her voice again. This time it was sharp, demanding. "Where do you think you're going, Justin?" I froze, my hand still on the door handle. I slowly turned around, half expecting to see her standing there. But the hallway was empty. The house was silent now, save for the sound of my own breathing. And then, from behind me, I heard her voice again, a low, distorted laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Come to me, Justin." My heart raced, my hands trembling as I turned toward the voice. It wasn't just her voice anymore. It was a chorus of whispers echoing all around me, seeping into the walls. I could feel the air growing colder, the temperature in the hallway dropping as if the very essence of the house was changing. My feet felt frozen to the floor, but my mind screamed at me to run. I turned back to the door, yanking the handle with all my strength. It didn't budge. The door was locked. Panic set in, and I pounded my fist against the wood, desperate to escape. "Mom?" I choked out, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to the woman who had once been my mother or to whatever it was that had taken her place. There was no answer, only the growing cacophony of whispers. Suddenly, I heard the soft creak of floorboards behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway seemed empty, too quiet now. But I could feel it. She was close, just out of sight, hiding in the shadows. "Justin." Her voice came again, closer this time, from just beyond the corner. "Come to me." Without thinking, I bolted down the hallway, not caring where I was going, only that I needed to escape. I ran past the living room, the kitchen, the staircase, heading for the back door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt something cold press against my back, as if a hand had gently laid itself there. My body tensed, and my breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, afraid of what I might see. Standing behind me was my mother, or at least a thing that looked like her. Her eyes were hollow, dark voids, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. Her mouth was open, and she was grinning at me, but the smile was too wide, too sharp. It was a grin that no mother should have. "Don't run, Justin," she whispered, her voice laced with something that didn't sound human. "You belong with me. You have to come with me." I backed away, panic flooding my system. "No, you're not my mom. What happened to you? What did you do to her?" She took a step forward, her head tilting unnaturally to the side. I'm more than she ever was, she said, the words dripping with malice. You'll see. You'll understand soon enough. I was shaking now, my legs feeling like jelly, but I couldn't stand still. My mind was screaming for me to run, to get out of this nightmare, but my body felt frozen, unable to move. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it any longer, the voice came again. This time not from my mother, but from somewhere deeper in the house. Leave him alone. It was my dad. I hadn't heard him come in, but there he was standing at the top of the stairs. His face was pale, his expression one of horror. But when he looked at me, his eyes filled with something else, concern, but also recognition. Dad, help me! I screamed, but his gaze never left my mother or whatever that thing was. His lips trembled, and I could see him trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The thing that had been my mother slowly turned its gaze toward him, its smile widening as if it had been waiting for this. No one can save you, Justin, it hissed. No one will stop what's coming. And then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room, lying on my bed as if nothing had happened. But it had happened. I could feel it. I wasn't imagining things. My heart was still racing in my chest, and the house felt wrong. It was as if something had shifted, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I sat up quickly, my breath shallow. The whispers were gone. The house was silent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that I wasn't alone. I looked at the door, and to my horror, I saw my mother standing in the doorway. Her face was still the same as before, pale, twisted, but there was something different, something more alive about her, like she had regained a part of herself. Come to me, Justin, she said again, her voice soft and insistent, almost like a lullaby. But this time I wasn't afraid. I didn't run. I stood up and looked her straight in the eye. No, I said, my voice firm. You're not my mom, and I'm not going anywhere with you. Her smile faltered for a moment, and then she tilted her head back, letting out a laugh that was neither human nor comforting. It was a laugh full of pain, full of rage. You will? And then the world around me began to spin. The room blurred, the walls warped, and I felt myself being pulled, dragged into something deeper. The shadows stretched and twisted, and before I could scream, everything went dark once more. When I woke again, I wasn't in my room anymore. I wasn't even sure where I was. My surroundings were completely unfamiliar, and the air felt dense, like I was breathing through a thick fog. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust my vision, but everything was still a blur. The only thing I could clearly hear was the faint sound of whispers, just like before. But this time they were different, softer, more insistent, almost comforting. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, as if something was holding me down. Panic bubbled up in my chest as I struggled to get up, but the effort was useless. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I froze, my heart pounding, and slowly turned my head to see who, or what, was behind me. To my shock, it was my mother, but this time her face was normal. No twisted grin, no hollow eyes. She looked like the mother I remembered, but there was something off about her, something that made my skin crawl. Mom? I whispered, my voice hoarse. She didn't answer at first. She just stared at me, her eyes softening as if she recognized me. Then, her lips curled into a sad smile. You're still here, Justin. I've been waiting for you. I tried to speak, to ask her what was happening, why everything felt so wrong, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, as though something was blocking them. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. You don't understand yet, do you? It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. You were chosen. Chosen for what? My voice was barely a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and touched my cheek. Her hand was cold, but there was an unnatural warmth to it, like she was made of something that shouldn't exist. I recoiled instinctively, but she just watched me with those sad, empty eyes. It's too late, Justin, she said quietly. You're already a part of this. The change has already started. I shook my head, trying to make sense of her words. What change? What are you talking about? Her smile grew wider. You'll see soon enough. You'll understand. But for now, you need to rest. Before I could respond, everything around us shifted. The walls seemed to melt away. and the room I had been in disappeared, leaving only darkness. The whispers grew louder, and I felt my body being pulled like gravity itself had turned against me. I reached out, but there was nothing to grab onto. I was floating in the void, drifting deeper into the blackness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. And then I saw them, shadows in the darkness, forms moving around me. They didn't look human. If anything, they were twisted, distorted versions of people I once knew. Faces that were familiar, yet wrong. Eyes that stared with an intensity that made my stomach churn. One by one, they reached out to me, their cold fingers brushing against my skin. I wanted to pull away, to fight, but my body was paralyzed, trapped in this dark realm. I felt like I was being suffocated by it, consumed by it. And then, I heard her voice again. "You're not alone, Justin," she whispered softly. "We're all here. You're a part of us now." Suddenly, everything stopped. The darkness, the whispers, the pressure. It all vanished in an instant. I was standing in what seemed like an endless, desolate field. The sky was dark, the ground beneath me cracked and dry, and the air smelled of decay. But the most terrifying part? I wasn't alone. All around me were figures, cloaked in shadows, watching me with vacant eyes. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized some of their faces. There were people I knew, friends, neighbors, even strangers. All of them were staring at me with an expression that sent chills down my spine. Empty, lifeless, yet somehow aware. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response. The figures began to move toward me, their steps slow but deliberate. I could feel their cold presence growing closer, their gaze never leaving me. The world around me seemed to close in, and I knew, deep down, that I was no longer in control of anything. This place, these people, they were all a part of something much darker, something ancient. And now, I was a part of it too. After a while, my mother changed drastically. At first, it was subtle, the way her eyes would glaze over, as if she wasn't fully there, but then it got worse. Her skin started to break out in gray blisters, almost as though her flesh was rotting from the inside. Her hair, once vibrant and full of life, became dull and faded, like it had been drained of all color. But it wasn't just her appearance. It was her presence. She no longer smiled when she looked at me. There was no warmth in her voice, no love in her touch. Her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, no longer looked like my mother's. They were devoid of any recognition, like she was a stranger wearing her face. I remember the moment I truly realized it. I came home from school one day and found her standing in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she stirred something in a pot on the stove. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, but when I called out to her, there was no response. I walked over, and that's when I saw her face more clearly. The gray blisters covered her cheeks, her forehead, even her neck. It was as if something had infected her, something that didn't belong in this world. She turned slowly to face me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But then, the emptiness returned, even stronger than before. "Mom?" I whispered, my heart sinking. "What's happening to you?" She didn't answer. She didn't even acknowledge me. She just stared at me, her expression vacant, like she wasn't seeing me at all. That was when I knew for sure. This wasn't my mother anymore. It wasn't even her body. Something else had taken over, something dark and unnatural. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I backed away, my mind racing with a million questions I couldn't answer. What had happened to her? Why was she changing? What was I supposed to do? But deep down I knew. I knew that I wasn't going to get any answers. Not from her. Not from anyone. I had no choice but to figure it out on my own. But with every passing day, I felt like I was slipping further away from everything I knew. From reality. From the life I had once taken for granted. And from the person who used to be my mother. Days passed, and things only grew worse. My mother's strange behavior continued, and I found it harder to look at her without feeling a deep sense of dread creeping through me. I tried talking to my father about it, but he just brushed it off, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "She's just stressed," he would say. "The new job, the change of routine, it'll take time to adjust." But I knew it wasn't just that. This was something much worse. One evening, after dinner, my father was in the living room watching TV, while my mother, as usual, sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. I couldn't help myself anymore. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and watch her fade away into whatever this was. "Mom?" I called softly, hesitating before I walked into the kitchen. "Mom, can we talk?" She didn't respond. Her head didn't even turn toward me, but I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my neck. I took a step closer, my breath shallow. I don't know what's happening to you," I said, my voice trembling. "But we need to figure it out. You need help. This isn't you. This isn't who you are." There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought maybe she had stopped breathing. Then, slowly, her hands began to twitch on the table. She didn't raise her eyes to meet mine, but I could feel a shift in the air, something ominous. Then, in a voice that wasn't hers, she spoke. "It's too late for me, Justin," she said, her words sounding slow, almost deliberate. "Too late for all of us?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I froze, too terrified to move. That wasn't my mom's voice. That wasn't her tone. It was deeper, colder, and had a foreign quality to it, as though something or someone else was speaking through her. "Mom?" I whispered, my heart hammering in my chest. Her head jerked toward me, and I took a step back instinctively. Her eyes were no longer the same. The light that used to shine behind them had been extinguished. They were black, empty voids that seemed to suck in the room's light. A low, guttural growl escaped from her throat as she slowly rose from the chair, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Mom, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "I don't know what's going on, but you have to fight this. Please come back." For a moment, she paused, as if considering my words. And then, in the most chilling voice I had ever heard, she replied, "It's not her anymore. It never was." My blood ran cold, and I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the house, not even bothering to grab my jacket, just desperate to get away from her. I ran into the night, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that I couldn't stay there. I didn't return home that night. I didn't want to, and I couldn't bring myself to. The image of her, my mother, staring at me with those soulless eyes, those words echoing in my mind, was all I could think about. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. It was as if I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. The next morning, I returned home, cautiously opening the front door. The house was eerily silent. I stepped inside, expecting to find her, expecting to find something that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing. The kitchen was empty, the table still set from the night before, as though time had frozen. The house felt hollow, like it had been abandoned long ago. And then, from the shadows, I heard a voice. Not my mother's this time, but something else. Something deeper, darker. It whispered my name. "Justin."